Good evening. We're dealing with Parashat Shemot, and we're in the second verse. We'll just read the first verse anyway. Ve'ela Shemos b'nei Yisrael haba'i Mitzrayma es Yaakov ish u'beiso ba'u. And these are the names of the children of Israel who came to Egypt with Yaakov. Each man and his household came. Okay, the second verse in English. Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda. Okay, the rest of the verses go on to the rest of the names. Third verse, Yisachar, Zvulun, and Binyamin. Fourth verse, Dan and Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. Fifth verse, and all the persons who emerged from Yaakov's loins were 70 souls, and Yosef was in Egypt. So the verse in Hebrew is just the names. Reuven, Shimon, V'gomer, the Kli Yakar starts off, and he says, Parat kan shmotam, detailed out are their names. Al derech HaMidrash. There's a very interesting Midrash in Vayikra Rabbah Lamed Bet Hey, and it talks about in the merit of four things Am Yisrael, the nation of Israel, our forefathers merited to be redeemed from Egypt. B'schut arba devarim nig'alu avoseinu mimitzrayim. So these are the four things. B'schut shalosh shinu et shmam, on account of the fact that they did not change their names, they merited to leave Egypt. 2, ve'et l'shonam, they did not change their language. The third, v'shahayu gedurim me araot, they did not break, they kept themselves guarded against sexual immorality. Fourth, v'lo hayu behem delakturon. That's another word for lashon hara and evil speech and talking behind people and losing trust between people. We'll explain that hopefully shortly. So the Kli Yakar goes on. V'tamu shel davarhu. The reason for the matter is, as he's about to explain, Kedamasik b'yuchot parshazu, as also explained in the Midrash on this parsha, Shekol Shmot Hashvatim Nikru'u Al Shem HaGeula. Each one of the names of the tribes are reminiscent, are hinted, each name in its essence, each name of the tribe signifies or is calling out. Each name is a name in itself that represents a concept of redemption and salvation. And here we'll go through some of the names online. What I'll do is I'll post the whole page. Okay, so we're going to start with Reuven. This is in Shmot, Exodus 3, verse 7. So in English it says, and Hashem said, I have indeed seen the affliction of my people that is in Egypt. So what is that part of the verse in Hebrew? V'yomer Hashem ra'o re'iti et aniami as asher b'mitzrayim. So God is saying, I have surely seen, I have indeed seen. So the word ra'o is related to Reuven. Shimon, the next name, Al Shein v'yishmel Elokim et na'akatam. So if you look in Shmos, that's Exodus 2, verse 24. So in English, God heard their moaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham. So you have in Hebrew, Shimon Ashema v'yishma Elokim es na'akatam. The word Shimon is related to the word v'yishma. It's hinted at. V'chein kulam, and also with all the rest of the names, which, very happy, I'll put up online. And make sure that when you hear the shiur, you can access the pages that I upload. U'lefi zeh, according to everything we just said, if they would have changed their names, lo haya lehem roshem al ha'geula, So there would not have been any type of a impression on the redemption, because they would have had different names. Maybe their names would have been Tom or Jack or Harry or Andrew, but that would not have signified or hinted at the essence of the redemption, whereas their Hebrew names did, or the birth names. But he's going one step further. He's saying that they wouldn't have been fit to be redeemed if they didn't have those names of redemption. After the fact, if they would have changed their names, which signified and was representative by the concept of salvation, and they would have been called by another name, perhaps, like I said, Tom, Harry, or Jack, because we cannot figure out how the names Tom, Harry, or Jack somehow represents redemption. So the very fact that their names represented redemption, and that was, the name is the essence of the person, so to that extent, they wouldn't have had the merit or the roshim, the impression of redemption. That's how important and the strength of a name has on who you are, or what you're going to accomplish in your life. Ohailem Shinoi Hashem Siba Yaesh Min HaGeula. Or if they would have changed their names, which is the Siba, the reason for their Geula, Yaesh Min HaGeula, for certainly they would have then given up any hope for the Geula. Lo hayu mevakshim es pnei Hashem, and again, as a result of changing their names, which would not have any reference to redemption, they would have no longer sought out the face of Hashem, al ha'geula v'al temura, regarding salvation and its value. Kmokain, similarly, ilu hayom mishanim es loshonam, if they would have changed their name, their language. Let's say they kept their names, but they would have changed their language. Even if they didn't change their names, let's say they kept the name Reuven and Shimon, but they talked, I don't know, let's say Russian. They kept some kind of other language, and maybe Reuven and Shimon does not mean what Reuven and Shimon means in Hebrew. So then certainly at that point, their names no longer reflect salvation. It's specifically and only in Hebrew language, in Lashon HaKodesh, in the holy language, that Reuven will reflect by the name, as we mentioned, God will surely see, has indeed seen, the affliction of his people. And Shimon, as we mentioned, that God hears, V'yishma Elokim. Of a lashon acher, but if it would have been a different language, as I just mentioned as an example, perhaps Russian, Ein Shem Reuven Moir Al Re'iti. It no longer has the same meaning. It means something else in a different language. V'chein b'kulam. So too with all the names of the tribes. And on account of the fact and the merit that they guarded themselves against sexual immorality, al kain lo hayu ruim liyot bein mitzraim shetufei zima. They weren't fit to be amongst the Egyptian women who were so steeped in sexual immorality. As it says in Yecheskel, how do we know that Egyptians are steeped in sexual immorality? It's a very awkward pasuk, but it's Ezekiel 23, verse 20. I'd like to read 19 first in English. Then she increased her adulteries, remembering the days of her youth, when she was promiscuous in the land of Egypt. She lusted for the concubinage of those whose flesh is the flesh of donkeys, and whose issue is the issue of horses. So I'm going to read in Hebrew, verse 20. V'ta'agva al pelag shehem asher basar chamurim basaram v'zimrat susim v'zimratam. It's a very descriptive verse about perhaps even bestiality. So not only were the Egyptians promiscuous with other humans, but perhaps it went even a step further than that according to Yecheskel. And what was the fourth thing? On account of the fact that they were not speaking Lashon Hara, going around and telling and tattling and just, let's call it, loose lips. They were not like that. So if we look at chapter 11, verse 2, what was already commanded to them? Let's see. This is talking about for the 11th plague. So chapter 11, verse 2. Please speak in the ears of the people. Let each man request of his fellow and each woman from her fellow silver vessels and gold vessels. So remember, the Jewish people were supposed to leave Egypt with great wealth. This command was given in the very beginning, 12 months, approximately 12 months, could be anywhere from 10 to 12 months before the actual asking of the Egyptians for their wealth. They requested to borrow much of their wealth. So what are we saying here? Since they asked each person, right? They were supposed to ask. They're going to ask. It was a command that they're going to ask. And on account of the fact that they kept that quiet, it was just known amongst the Jews alone. Only the Jews know. Can you imagine? We all know that in 11 or 12 months we're going to leave Egypt and we're going to all ask our neighbors for their wealth. We're told this, 10, 11 months in advance. And the secret never got any further. If it would have gotten further, perhaps they would have hid their stuff or denied our ability to get it. So the Kli Yakar says, Al Kei Nigalu. It was on account of the fact that we kept this a secret, right? We didn't speak Lashon Hara. In this case, that's how he's describing Lashon Hara, being able to keep a secret. Ki ilu lo haya hadavar pakud, lo haya mash'ilim lehem klum. Right? If they didn't keep this a secret, they wouldn't have been able to ask anything. And of course, if that was the case, we wouldn't have actually been able to leave Egypt because of a promise that was made to Abraham that your children will leave with great wealth. So that Abraham would not be able to say in the future, this is from the Gemara Brachos, Daf Tes Amud Bet, right? In the covenant between the parts, V'avudam v'inu otam, with a promise, wasn't a blessing, but we'll call it a promise, that they would be enslaved for 400 years, and of course they would go out from slavery with much wealth. So maybe Abraham would say, great, so the slavery part, kayem behem, you fulfilled, because I know these people worked for, whether it was 210, whether it was 116, whether it was 86 hard years of labor. Whereas the second part of that promise, that they would certainly leave with a large amount of wealth, lo kayem behem. Perhaps Avraham might be able to say that, so that was not the case, because of course they kept the secret. They ended up asking all their non-Jewish Egyptian neighbors for their wealth, and they left with great wealth as promised. L'chak ne'emar. Now we understand why it says, Ve'elu shmos b'nei Yisrael. These are the names of the children of Israel. Ki afa pi shemes Yosef. Even though that we know that Yosef had died. Even though Yosef had died, v'aya hashibud karov lavo. Right? As soon as Yosef died, the shibud, the slavery, was close in coming. Mekom mekom roishim geula nishar kayam. Nevertheless, even though Yosef died and the slavery was about to hit very hard, nevertheless the impression of the final redemption remained with them. And what was that? That was their names. that was more than their names. Ki ilu elu shmotam, because those names, imahem bo'u l'shavar, v'imahem hema haboyim gam akshav. Even though they came with those names when they came down to Egypt, they kept those names even until now. Kilot nishtanu shmotam. They did not change their names. That was the first thing on the list. On account of not changing their names, they merited to be redeemed. V'zeraya shegam l'shonan lo shinu. This is actually the proof that the language they didn't change, as we already pretty much explained. Di'im lo kain, because if that was not the case, ein nifkuta b'meh shelo shinu shmatam. There wouldn't have been any real difference if they had not changed their name. Remember, if they changed their language, then the name would mean something else. And if you tell me they didn't change their name, obviously they didn't change their language, or they wouldn't have been merited to be redeemed. It's hand in hand. And then it says, U ish u beito ba'u, each man with his family they came. That was in the first verse. Shayu gduri me'aros. That proves that they kept pure in their family relations. They were not involved in extramarital affairs. Shugduri me'aros. That each one clung to his own wife and not to another. And furthermore, each of them married women before they came down to Egypt. So they were all married, they're all paired up. In order that they should not marry women from amongst the Egyptian women who are involved and steeped in sexual immorality. And then the next verse goes into very fine detail about their names, Reuven, Shimon, v'chule, and onward. Because the names themselves reflect and teach about the redemption. And we talked about the last one, about the Lashon Hara. V'hikol nefesh. And it says, Ki kara l'shivim nefashos nefesh achas. And that was for each of all the souls. We said there were 70 souls. So it calls all 70, v'hikol nefesh, it's singular. It's as if it's one soul. L'irmo shah shalom beinehem. That's what we need in Kli Yakar. This is our redemptive quality, that when we are wholesome and one and perfect with each other, we merit to be redeemed. So here also, when they went down to Egypt, they were one, came up, on our way out. Mitok shelo haya behem lashon hara v'dei la torin. There was no lashon hara amongst them. Ki ish echad shaliba lepuma lo galei. That they were as one person, one heart, and the mouth never revealed anything. Kachaya hadavar pakud etzlam kol shnei moser chodesh. And that's how it was commanded by them, and they kept to it all 12 months. Ulai shagam mitam zenemar. Perhaps also from this reason it was mentioned, Yotzei Yerech Yaakov. Right, these were the lineage, the progeny that came out from Yaakov's loins. Lomer lecha, to tell you, ma yerech b'seiser, just like a yerech. We're talking about the thigh, and not just any upper thigh. Just like the thigh itself is covered, ach etzlem haya hadavar b'seiser etzlam. So too, the way this was held by them, they hid it as a secret, and it was not revealed. And this is one of the major fundamental issues that has been following us for the last 2,000 years. All the calamities that have happened to us happened as a result, as Chazal say, is because of the original sin of sinat chinam, of causeless hatred. Mamish, causeless hatred. And if only we could overcome that, and we could really feel and have empathy for our brother and understand that we're all not cookie cutters, we're all not made, we basically come from the same mold. But thank God, each one of us is very different, and we should appreciate the differences in everyone else. and we should have empathy for people in need, and we'll do whatever we can to prevent the continuation of the Lashon Hara or the causeless hatred that caused the original downfall of the Second Temple, and in Yirtzeh Hashem, through the tikkun of this not speaking Lashon Hara, not having any enmity towards another Jew, we should, in Yirtzeh Hashem, see the ingathering of the exiles, the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash, of course Sanhedrin, and Bezrat Hashem should happen soon in our days.